Hello, my name is GrizzliusMaximus and welcome to my Beartopia Devlog series. In this video, I'll be sharing with you the secret of how I developed my game to run 10 times faster while still maintaining the quality. Now, if you're new here, and you probably are, Beartopia Beta Edition is available for free on itch.io, so please check it out. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'm currently implementing world generation for the newest version of Beartopia, and I will talk more about it in a later video. You don't want to miss it. Now, let us first run a stress test on Beartopia Beta Edition and see how many frames we can get with 1000 bears. On the top right hand corner, we can see the debug overlay and the FPS. The numbers are a bit hard to see, but as we reach 400 bears, the game starts to dip lower than 60 FPS. By the time we reach 1000 bears, we are getting about 20 FPS. Now, let us run the same stress test on the new Beartopia. At 400 bears, the game still runs at 200 FPS. At 1000 bears, we managed to reach over 150 FPS. That is amazing. What is the secret to achieving high FPS while still maintaining quality? The answer is years of game development. I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not. For 6 long years, after several iterations of Beartopia, I was able to come up with some optimization tricks that I wish I had known sooner. Today is your lucky day, for I'll be sharing with you these tips that took me years to figure out. Tip number 1. Pixel perfect scaling. The first tip does not improve the frame rate, but it does improve the quality of the game. Here's a screenshot of Beartopia Beta, and if you look closely, you would see a ton of distortions. These distortions happen when the sprites do not align with the screen pixels. We can prevent this by always scaling the sprites by a whole number and never by a fraction. Beartopia Beta Edition made this terrible mistake by scaling the camera view size by powers of 1.2. This fractional scaling was the cause of the distortions. The new version of Beartopia removed such distortions by scaling the camera view size by powers of 2 instead. Aside from making sure the scaling is a whole number, we also want to make sure the resolution dimensions are whole numbers as well. If not, the game will round them off and break the aspect ratio. The window size of Beartopia is 960 by 540 and had no problems having a scale of ×2 and ×4. Unfortunately, with ×8 scaling, things did not look so great. The black bar you see here is the result of having an unmatching aspect ratio. I solved this by scaling the view size to 12 instead of 8. When it comes to full screen, having pixel perfect scaling can be quite a challenge. I designed Beartopia to work well with 1080p screens, but what if somebody were to play it on a 720p, 1440p, or the dreaded 1366 by 768? Unfortunately, tip number 1 cannot solve this problem, but tip number 3 can. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let us move on to tip number 2. Upscaling the application surface. Listen up, for this tip is what boosted Beartopia to have 10 times faster frame rates. You see, properly scaling the application surface can reduce the number of pixels drawn, and it is possible to do this while still maintaining quality. Before I share with you what I did, let me explain how GameMaker renders the sprites to screen. You may not know this, but GameMaker draws all the sprites to the application surface and then draws the application surface to the screen. In between these steps, GameMaker automatically scales the sprite and application surface based on the ratio of application surface size to view size, and window size to application surface size, respectively. We can easily change these scalings by resizing the application surface. Beartopia Beta made the mistake of keeping the application surface the same size as the window. This method works, but it's not well optimized. Here's the thing. Every sprite was getting upscaled before being drawn to the application surface. That was inefficient. If we were to make the application surface the same size as the view, the sprites do not get rescaled, which lowers the total number of pixels drawn. But what happens when we zoom out and the view size is larger than the window size? In this case scenario, it would be wiser to have the application surface to be the same size as the window. That way, every sprite gets downscaled, which lowers the number of pixels drawn. In short, we want the application surface size to match either the window size or the view size, whichever is smaller. The caveat of this method is it forces pixel snapping. Pixel snapping can make sprite movements look choppy, especially when seen up close. On the other hand, you do want to have pixel snapping if you're trying to make an authentic pixelated game. I, for one, do like pixel snapping. The problem with it, however, is not on the sprite movement, but on the choppy camera movement. It might just be my preference, but I absolutely could not stand it. Which brings us to the third and final tip: custom application surface. Remember the application surface mentioned earlier? Well, we can throw that into the trash can, for we're going to make our very own custom application surface. Now, I know most of you guys would not want to go through the hassles of making a custom application surface, but hear me out. Remember how we can change the scalings by resizing the application surface? Now, what happens if we want to define these scalings without having to resize the application surface? What happens if we would like to resize the application surface without affecting the scaling? We could not unless we use a custom application surface. Here's what I'm trying to do. To get smooth camera movement, I offset the drop position of the application surface by a fraction of a pixel. However, offsetting the application surface would lead to black bars at the edge of the screen. A simple fix would be to increase the height and width of the application surface to fill in those black bars. Before the application surface gets offset further than a pixel, I reset the offset while maintaining the view position on the screen, resulting in smooth, seamless camera movement. Take note that this method resizes the application surface while maintaining scaling, and so using default application surface is not possible. Therefore, we need to create a custom application surface. To make our custom application surface, we first make sure to disable the default application surface. After that, we make our custom application surface like any other surface. Just make sure to add more pixels to the height and width of the surface to deal with the black bars during offset. We also have to deal with the offset and scaling of the sprites. The best way to handle this is to set new values for the world matrix. The world matrix sets the translation, rotation, and scaling of all sprites drawn. That way, we do not need to offset and scale every single sprite. Last time, when we were still using the default application surface, GameMaker was automatically setting the world matrix for us. Now that we are using a custom application surface, we have to set the world matrix ourselves. Here's how I set the world matrix. This world matrix will translate each sprite by the negative view position multiplied by the sprite scale, and scale each sprite by the sprite scale. The sprite scale will be the application surface size without the extra pixels over the view size. We set this world matrix once for the whole game at the start of every draw event. Once we finish drawing all the sprites to the application surface, we need to reset the world matrix back to origin before drawing the application surface to the game window. Just make sure you set the world scale to 1 and not to 0. We get the offset as follows. The math is hard to explain, but what it does is get the modulo 1 of both positive and negative view positions. Make sure you round off the actual view position beforehand, or this would not work. Next, we use the draw surface part extension function to draw our application surface. Note that we use the offset as the top left position of the surface part and the size of the application surface without the extra pixels as the surface part size. Last but not least, we scale the surface part by the window size over the application surface size. If you follow all these tips correctly, you will get something like this. As I mentioned back in tip number 1, aside from smooth camera effect, creating this custom application surface allows a non-distorted full screen view with no black bars, regardless if it's 720p, 1440p, or 1366 by 768, it doesn't matter. These tips, especially the last one, are a lot to chew on, so if you have problems understanding or have any questions regarding these tips, please feel free to leave them on the comment section down below. If you want more in-depth guide to pixel-perfect scaling, resolution, and aspect ratio management, I highly suggest checking out Pixelate the Pope's video series. He even covers codes from GMS1 to GMS2 and talks about the theory in depth. If you have not watched my first video, please do check it out. Also, I'm currently developing world generation for the newest version of Beartopia, so please subscribe and hit that bell notification so you will not miss it when it comes out. I hope you guys enjoyed this devlog/tutorial video. Like if you like, and see you in the next video.